Her millionaire fiancé sent a voice memo by mistake. What she heard about herself made her walk away the next morning. A great love story with deep, passionate scenes and a beautiful reunion. The best second chance love story ever. Now, the introduction will be very short. Many of you leave early, and my channel is down by 70%. I don't want to leave you or this channel because we are one family. Hi, my beautiful family. Today, I share something very close to my heart. My first cousin has passed away from a heart attack caused by the weight of financial struggles and the pain of his wife's harsh behavior. This loss is a reminder to all of us. Life is fragile, and we only get one chance to live it. Please don't carry tension on your shoulders until it breaks you. Be gentle with each other, be polite, and treat your partner with kindness and respect. Love your children, love your family, and above all, value the hearts that beat beside you every day. Money may come and go, but peace, compassion, and understanding are what keep a home alive. I am sharing this with you because you are not just my audience. You are my family. I never want you or your loved ones to face such pain. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Let's start today's story with love for my family. Destiny has a peculiar way of announcing itself, sometimes through whispers, sometimes through earthquakes that realign the cosmos of two unsuspecting hearts. The Baccarat crystal flute exploded against the Italian marble like a starburst, champagne cascading in golden arcs across Abigail Peters' midnight black Vera Wang. She lifted her gaze from the destruction to discover herself drowning in the most impossibly azure eyes she'd encountered in her 28 years of careful living. "Christ, I'm mortified," the stranger breathed, his voice carrying traces of old money and new vulnerability that made every nerve ending in her body suddenly hyper-aware. He possessed the kind of devastating handsomeness that belonged on Armani billboards, sharp jaw, raven hair that suggested he'd spent the afternoon running powerful fingers through it, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of empires. I was utterly transfixed by... His sentence dissolved as their gazes locked. By absolute perfection. Heat bloomed across Abigail's dark skin like sunrise. "It's merely fabric," she managed, though her voice emerged honeyed and breathless. Something about this man radiated magnetic intensity that made her feel simultaneously safe and wildly reckless. "Nothing about you is mere," he countered, producing an Egyptian cotton handkerchief monogrammed with elegant script. "You're wearing art, and I've just committed vandalism." His descent to her level was graceful, almost reverent, as he dabbed champagne from the silk without presumption. Where his fingertips grazed her skin, electricity danced. "I'm Jace," he murmured, rising with fluid athleticism. "Jace Walker." Even someone who deliberately avoided Wall Street gossip recognized that name. Walker Technologies commanded headlines across 3 continents, and its architect now regarded her as if she'd personally illuminated his universe. "Abigail Peter," she replied, accepting his proffered hand. The instant flesh met flesh, tectonic plates shifted in her chest cavity. "The visionary behind Meridian's transformation," Jace said, astonishing her. "Your sustainable luxury concept revolutionized hospitality design. I've studied your portfolio extensively." "You've studied my work?" The genuine admiration in his tone made her pulse quicken beyond professional pride. "I make it my life's mission to recognize transcendent talent," he said, thumb tracing her knuckles with butterfly softness. "The same way I'm recognizing transcendent beauty at this precise moment." Such words from other wealthy suitors had earned eye rolls and swift exits, but Jace's declaration carried authenticity that penetrated her considerable defenses, warmth that suggested he'd moved beyond flattery into dangerous territory, like actual fascination. "Perhaps you'd permit me to rectify this catastrophe." His gesture encompassed her champagne-dampened dress. Dinner tomorrow? Somewhere serving beverages in unbreakable containers, so I cannot further destroy your magnificent wardrobe. Abigail's laughter bubbled up unbidden, musical and genuine enough to transform his features into something approaching wonderment. That depends, she heard herself saying with unprecedented boldness. Do you maintain this level of charm throughout entire meals, or merely while demolishing designer clothing? Only one method exists for determining that, Jace replied, producing his phone with practiced elegance. Grant me your number, Abigail Peter, and I guarantee our first real conversation will become permanently etched in your memory. 6 months later, suspended above Malibu's coastline as Pacific breezes painted the sky in vermilion and gold, Abigail realized Jace had fulfilled that promise beyond her wildest imagination. Their courtship had unfolded like scenes from the most intoxicating romance novel. Private Boeing flights to Parisian penthouses where they'd made love against floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Champs-Élysées, their bodies joining with desperate passion that left them both gasping and greedy for more. Candle-lit dinners in his Tribeca sanctuary where conversation flowed like aged wine, discussions of family legacies lost and dreams yet to be born, confessions shared over stolen kisses that tasted of vulnerability and infinite possibility. Dancing barefoot in his marble-floored living room to Miles Davis and Billie Holiday, moving together like lovers who'd found their missing piece. Jace possessed supernatural abilities where her happiness was concerned. He memorized her preferences with scientific precision: Ethiopian coffee with brown sugar and heavy cream, white peonies because their abundance reminded her of Grandmother Rose's garden, the way she unconsciously hummed Nina Simone while sketching. His gifts demonstrated profound attention rather than ostentatious wealth. First edition Baldwin, because she'd mentioned loving Go Tell It on the Mountain, an antique drafting table belonging to Paul Williams, because she'd expressed admiration for his architectural legacy, a custom necklace featuring the exact geometric pattern from their first dance. Every gesture seemed orchestrated by benevolent fate. When winter colds rendered her miserable, he appeared bearing homemade soup and classic Cary Grant films. When demanding clients tested her patience, he listened for hours while massaging tension from her shoulders, offering insights that reminded her why she'd chosen her profession. When grief ambushed her, parents lost too young in rain-slicked intersections, he simply held her, sharing stories of his own premature orphaning until tears transformed into healing. "Abigail," Jace said now, his voice barely penetrating the helicopter's mechanical symphony. He knelt on the platform's edge, cradling a Tiffany box containing a diamond so magnificent it seemed to have captured the entire sunset within its crystalline heart. "From our first collision, you revolutionized my existence," he continued, sapphire eyes blazing with emotion that made her knees unsteady. "You've inspired me toward unprecedented greatness, transformed me from someone who merely survived into a man worthy of extraordinary love. You've illuminated territories in my soul I never knew remained shrouded in darkness." Tears cascaded down Abigail's cheeks as she absorbed this incredible man, successful beyond measure, brilliant beyond comparison, gorgeous beyond reason, offering his heart and future with trembling hands. "I'm captivated by your strength, your creativity, your laughter that could resurrect joy in morgues," Jace declared, voice cracking with raw emotion. "I worship how you perceive beauty in everything, how you transform sterile spaces into sanctuaries, how you make everyone around you feel valued and heard. I treasure how you challenge me toward excellence, never permitting me comfortable mediocrity." "Jace," she whispered, overwhelmed by the intensity crackling between them. "Abigail Peter, will you marry me? Will you become my wife, my partner, my queen for whatever years remain to us? Will you allow me to spend each dawn proving I'm worthy of your miraculous love?" "Yes," she breathed, then shouted over the rotor wash, "Yes, yes, eternally yes!" Jace's hands shook as he slipped the platinum band onto her finger, then swept her into his arms. Their kiss contained multitudes, desperate passion like their first encounter, tender promise like their private moments, fierce devotion like their shared dreams. The helicopter pilot diplomatically studied his instruments while they held each other against nature's spectacular backdrop, the diamond catching final sunbeams and scattering rainbows across their entwined hands. "I love you," Jace murmured against her lips, fingers tangling in her silk press. "Beyond comprehension, beyond logic, beyond every limit I thought constrained human emotion." "I love you completely," Abigail responded, heart expanding until she thought her ribcage might crack from containing such bliss. "Forever and always, through every storm and sunshine." "Forever and always," he echoed, spinning her as city lights began twinkling below like earthbound stars. "My queen." During their return flight, Abigail's hand nestled in Jace's, while Los Angeles glittered beneath them. She felt like destiny's most favored daughter. She was engaged to a man who cherished her utterly, who regarded her as his equal, who made her feel like sovereignty incarnate. Together they would construct an empire, not merely of financial success, but of love and family and dreams made manifest. She possessed no foreknowledge that in 3 weeks, a single misdirected voice message would detonate this perfect love story into irreparable fragments, revealing the man she planned to marry had been performing the most elaborate deception of all. She remained blissfully unaware that the fairy tale currently unfolding was nothing more than a sophisticated business strategy, and she merely another asset requiring acquisition and management. But suspended in this moment, soaring above the city with the man she loved beyond reason, Abigail Peter believed with every fiber of her being that she was living the opening chapter of the greatest love story ever written. She had no conception it was all carefully orchestrated theater, and the final act would soon commence. Chapter 2. Perfect Illusions. Paradise, Abigail would later understand, achieves its most breathtaking beauty in the heartbeat before it burns. The Walker estate commanded 15 acres of Connecticut's most coveted real estate, its Georgian revival mansion rising from emerald gardens like something conjured from Architectural Digest's most ambitious fantasies. Standing in the master suite's bay window, watching movers orchestrate her belongings' integration with Jace's, Abigail experienced homecoming so profound it seemed cellular. "That eastern wing will serve as your creative sanctuary," Jace murmured, arms encircling her from behind while his breath warmed her neck with familiar intimacy. "Floor-to-ceiling windows ensure optimal natural light throughout the day. I commissioned those industrial-grade drafting tables you coveted from that Soho antique dealer." Abigail melted against his solid chest, marveling at their physical harmony. "You anticipate my every need," she sighed, rotating in his embrace to brush grateful lips across his jaw. "Where you're concerned, yes," he replied, pressing kisses along her throat that generated cascading shivers. "I'm determined you'll flourish here. I need this to become our sanctuary, not merely my residence, but the foundation where we'll build our legacy." And flourish she did. Throughout the following weeks, Abigail transformed the mansion into their personal Eden with the same passion she brought to her most prestigious projects. She softened Jace's stark contemporary aesthetic with warm earth tones and rich textures, infusing spaces with personality and soulfulness. Deep burgundies and golden ambers warmed sterile white expanses. Luxurious furniture in jewel-toned velvets replaced austere leather minimalism. The forbidding dining room grew intimate beneath candlelight and arrangements of flowers she personally cultivated. The sterile great room became inviting with cashmere throws and coffee tables scattered with photography books, evidence of lives truly lived. Their master bedroom became pure romance, decorated in midnight blues and champagne golds that celebrated both their complexions beautifully. She hung gossamer panels that filtered morning light into something magical, arranged pillar candles on every surface, filled crystal vases with peonies and garden roses that perfumed their nights with intoxicating sweetness. "You've performed alchemy here," Jace declared one evening as they hosted their inaugural dinner party. The mansion glowed with warmth and sophistication, while their guests, his corporate associates mingling seamlessly with her artistic circle, moved through transformed spaces with obvious appreciation. "This feels authentically alive now, like a real home where real people experience real love." "We've performed alchemy," Abigail corrected, squeezing his hand beneath the table. "Everything I create here serves our shared vision." Those words caused Jace's smile to falter momentarily, so briefly she nearly missed the shadow crossing his features. But then he was kissing her temple and murmuring gratitudes, and she dismissed that flicker of something troubling. Their engagement dominated New York's social stratosphere. Their love story featured across magazines and blogs as the romance defining their generation. Photographers captured them at gallery openings and charity benefits, always touching, always laughing, obviously intoxicated by each other's presence. Media outlets celebrated their narrative, the tech mogul and the visionary designer, their interracial romance positioned as evidence that authentic love transcended all boundaries. "Power couple perfection," proclaimed one magazine spread featuring images from a United Way fundraiser. Abigail radiated in a custom gown inspired by African kente patterns, while Jace gazed at her like she'd personally rearranged the constellations for his pleasure. Wedding preparations consumed their evenings and weekends with delicious anticipation. They'd selected a Tuscan villa for the ceremony, a romantic setting overlooking ancient vineyards and silver-leafed olive groves that would bloom with wildflowers come June. Abigail designed every detail personally, invitations incorporating delicate gold leaf and roses honoring her grandmother's memory, floral cascades that would transform every surface, even her gown, an exquisite creation requiring 6 weeks and 4 seamstresses in Milan to achieve her vision. 200 guests, she mused one evening as they reviewed lists while intertwined in their silk-sheeted bed. "Does that seem excessive?" "For you, I'd invite every soul on earth," he replied, though again something indefinable flickered across his expression. "Some of my business associates might find your artistic friends culturally challenging." "Like Hannah Williams." Abigail noted the name while studying his face. "Your marketing director?" "Senior marketing executive," Jace corrected with suspicious swiftness, his caressing hand pausing on her bare shoulder. "She's been integral to company operations for years, extremely results-oriented, focused." Abigail had encountered Hannah briefly at several functions, a striking woman with platinum hair, emerald eyes, sharp as scalpels, and wardrobes that suggested European shopping sprees. She projected competence and professionalism, albeit with an underlying frost that made Abigail perpetually uncomfortable. "She seems to regard me with particular coolness," Abigail observed diplomatically. "Hannah maintains distance with everyone initially," Jace deflected, resuming his gentle caresses. "Don't interpret it personally. She's protective of company interests, which naturally extends to protecting me. She's witnessed too many corporate leaders destroyed by inappropriate romantic entanglements." Something about his explanation felt incomplete, triggering whispers of intuition Abigail couldn't quite name. But she was orchestrating her dream wedding to her soulmate. She refused to let paranoia contaminate that joy. Besides, Jace demonstrated devotion through countless daily gestures. He brought Ethiopian coffee prepared exactly to her preferences each morning, staying to steal kisses while she planned her day. Fresh flowers appeared in her studio daily, not expensive florist arrangements, but wildflowers he personally gathered during dawn runs. He never missed opportunities to praise her brilliance, her beauty, his gratitude for finding her. When client projects demanded late nights, he'd arrive bearing dinner and offering shoulder massages, listening to her work through design challenges while providing surprisingly insightful suggestions. When nightmares about her parents' accident haunted her sleep, trauma that sometimes resurged despite years of therapy, Jace held her through the darkness until dawn banished the demons. "I want us to start our family immediately," she confided one night as they lay entwined beneath Egyptian cotton, moonlight silvering their skin through gauze curtains. "I want our children raised in this house, surrounded by this love. I want them experiencing what it means to have parents who adore each other openly." "How many children do you envision?" Jace asked, voice strangely constricted, though she was too lost in maternal fantasies to notice. "3, perhaps 4, Abigail mused dreamily, fingertips tracing patterns across his chest. "I want this mansion filled with laughter and beautiful chaos and boundless love. I want to give them everything I lost when my parents died: stability, security, parents who demonstrate their devotion daily." "That sounds idyllic," Jace agreed, though his arms tightened around her almost possessively. "You'll be an extraordinary mother. Nurturing, protective, inspiring. And you'll be the father who teaches them to reach for stars while keeping their feet grounded," Abigail replied, pressing grateful kisses to his chest. "The Walker legacy will transcend mere business success. It'll represent love, family, building something genuinely meaningful." In darkness, Jace's jaw clenched with tension Abigail couldn't observe. "Yes," he said quietly, "the Walker legacy." Occasionally, though, Abigail noticed details that generated unease. Tiny fractures in their perfect facade she instructed herself to ignore. Jace would vanish for hours, claiming urgent business obligations that seemed oddly timed, late evenings, early Sunday mornings, even during their romantic weekend escapes. When she inquired about his days, he'd offer vague responses about investor relations and market positioning and strategic partnerships. "Global business never sleeps," he'd explain, kissing away her concerns. "After our wedding, I'll delegate more responsibilities. You and our future children will become my absolute priority." She also observed that Hannah Williams appeared at every significant business function, always impeccably dressed, always finding pretexts for private conversations with Jace. Their interactions seemed intense, intimate even, filled with knowing glances and inside references that made Abigail feel excluded from her own relationship. "She appears quite invested in company operations," Abigail mentioned one evening following a charity gala where Hannah had monopolized Jace's attention for nearly an hour. "She's ambitious, probably positioning for advancement." Jace laughed dismissively, drawing Abigail closer as their limousine glided through Manhattan traffic. "I barely register her presence, honestly. My attention is completely consumed by my gorgeous fiancé." Abigail desperately wanted to believe him. She did believe him, because when Jace looked at her, when he touched her, when he whispered her name during their most intimate moments, she felt like the only woman in existence. Surely love this consuming, this transformative, couldn't be constructed on deception. As their wedding approached, merely 3 weeks distant, Abigail felt nothing but anticipation and bliss. Dress fittings were flawless, venues were confirmed, flowers were ordered. She'd found her soulmate, her partner, her king. Soon she would become Mrs. Jace Walker, and their authentic life together would commence. She possessed no knowledge that across town, in a luxury apartment she'd never glimpsed, Jace was meeting with Hannah Williams to finalize strategies that would obliterate everything Abigail believed about their love. The trap was armed, the bait accepted, and Abigail Peter, brilliant, beautiful, trusting Abigail, was about to discover that even the most perfect love stories could be built on the most devastating lies. Chapter 3. shattered glass. Truth arrives wearing love's voice, making betrayal a knife that cuts deeper than any stranger's blade. Abigail was humming "At Last" while arranging white roses in the mansion's foyer when her phone buzzed. She saw Jace on the screen and smiled, but instead of his usual call, there was a voice message. Strange. He always called directly when traveling. He was in Chicago on business, another one of those mysterious trips that had become more frequent as their wedding approached. She missed him terribly. 3 days felt like 3 years when they were apart. The roses were for their upcoming engagement party, the final celebration before their Tuscan wedding. She'd spent hours selecting each bloom, wanting everything to be perfect for the guests who would toast their love story. The irony of that phrase would haunt her forever. Smiling, she pressed play, expecting to hear his warm voice telling her he loved her, that he missed her, maybe something romantic about counting the hours until he could hold her again. Instead, she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. "Emma, listen. I want only a baby from her, that's all she's good for." Jace's voice, but stripped of warmth, purely transactional. "Hannah can't give me children because of that car accident damage, and I need an heir for the Walker legacy. The board's getting antsy about succession. Grandfather's will is explicit, no heir by 40, and the company goes to charity." Abigail's hand trembled as she gripped the phone. This had to be a mistake, a wrong number, anything but what it sounded like. She pressed the phone closer to her ear, praying she'd misheard. "Abigail's perfect for this," Jace continued, his voice matter-of-fact, discussing her like she was a business acquisition. "Beautiful, intelligent genes, excellent breeding potential. She'll produce gorgeous babies with the right bloodline, and she's so completely in love with me, she'll never suspect that this whole relationship has been orchestrated from the beginning." The roses fell from Abigail's numb fingers, scattering across the marble floor like drops of blood. Her legs gave out, and she sank down among the petals while her world shattered around her. "The prenup is ironclad. She gets 50 million if we divorce, which is more than generous for 2 years of marriage. Once she gives me a son, I'll wait a respectable year or 2, then file for irreconcilable differences. Hannah and I can finally get married, and I'll have my heir and my company. It's perfect, Emma, a business arrangement disguised as the greatest love story ever told." Abigail sank to the floor among the scattered roses, her entire world crumbling around her. Her engagement ring, that massive symbol of what she thought was his devotion, suddenly felt like a shackle around her finger. "The best part is how easily she fell for it," Jace's voice continued, each word a knife to her heart. A few romantic gestures, some pretty words about her being extraordinary, and she was completely hooked. "She actually believes I love her. She talks about wanting 4 children. Can you imagine? Sometimes I almost feel sorry for her. She has no idea she's just a vessel for the Walker bloodline." There was a pause, and Abigail heard him laugh. Actually laugh, at her pain, at her foolishness, at the beautiful love story she thought they were writing together. Hannah's been incredibly patient, but she's getting anxious about the timeline. 5 years is a long time to wait for a man to secure his inheritance and his future. She understands that I need an heir to maintain control of the company, but she wants to know there's an end date to this charade. This way, we both get what we want. I get my company legacy secured, and Hannah gets to be Mrs. Jace Walker eventually. Just not quite yet. Mrs. Jace Walker. The title Abigail had dreamed of, practiced writing in her notebook like a teenager, imagined carrying with pride and joy. Now it felt like a cruel joke, a consolation prize for the woman who would get the real version of the man Abigail thought she knew. The timing has to be perfect, though. I need Abigail pregnant within the first 6 months of marriage. Can't risk her getting suspicious if it takes too long. I've been tracking her cycle using that fertility app she downloaded. She ovulates next week, right after we get back from the honeymoon in Santorini. I'll make sure we're very enthusiastic during that window. Abigail doubled over, physically sick. That app, she'd shown it to him excitedly, talking about planning their family, and he'd seemed so interested, so supportive. Now she realized he'd been studying it like a scientist, calculating the optimal time to impregnate his chosen broodmare. Every intimate moment they'd shared, every whispered endearment, every passionate night, it had all been performance art. She was nothing more than a prize heifer in his twisted business plan, valued only for her genetic material and her fertility. She's already talking about wanting 4 children. Jace continued with another laugh that made Abigail's skin crawl. I'll give her 1, maybe 2 if the first is a girl. But once I have my son, once the Walker legacy is secure and the board stops questioning my commitment to family values, I'm done with this charade. Hannah and I can finally stop pretending, and Abigail can disappear with her divorce settlement and whatever dignity she has left. The casual cruelty in his tone was breathtaking. He spoke about discarding her like she was office furniture that had outlived its usefulness. The children she dreamed of raising with love, he saw them as products to be delivered according to contract specifications. You should see how she lights up when she talks about our future kids, Jace continued, and Abigail could hear papers rustling in the background. She's already designed a nursery, picked out names, planned family vacations. It's almost sad how invested she is in a fantasy that'll never happen. Those dreams, those precious hopes she'd shared with him in their most intimate moments, he'd been cataloguing them like data points, probably reporting back to Hannah about how thoroughly he'd manipulated her heart. The message continued for several more agonizing minutes, Jace discussing logistics with his sister like they were planning a corporate merger instead of destroying an innocent woman's life. He talked about prenups and custody arrangements and how to maintain the facade until the product delivery was complete. He mentioned hiring a nanny so Abigail wouldn't be too attached to the child, making the eventual separation easier. The beauty of it is that everyone will see her as the grieving ex-wife who couldn't make it work, Jace said. No one will know she was just a placeholder. I'll make sure she's comfortable, but Hannah and I will raise my son. Our son, really. She's been involved in planning this whole thing from the beginning. Abigail's hands shook as she realized the full scope of their conspiracy. Hannah hadn't just been the patient mistress, she'd been the architect of Abigail's destruction. I have to go. Meeting with the board in an hour about the quarterly projections and the succession timeline. Just wanted to update you on where we stand. The wedding is in 3 weeks, honeymoon in Santorini, and then Operation Air production begins in earnest. By this time next year, Emma, I'll have everything I've ever wanted, the company secured, my real relationship legitimized, and the Walker name continuing into the next generation. The message ended with a beep that sounded like a death knell. Abigail sat on the cold marble floor of what she'd thought was her home, surrounded by the roses she'd arranged for a love that never existed, and cried until she had no tears left. Then she cried some more. The white petals around her seemed to mock her, symbols of purity and new beginnings, scattered and broken like her heart. Every memory was now poisoned. Their first meeting at the gallery. Had he orchestrated that too? Their romantic trips, their intimate conversations, his proposal on that cliff overlooking the Pacific. All of it had been scripted, performed, designed to make her fall so deeply in love that she would never question his motives. She thought about Hannah Williams, that cold, beautiful woman who'd looked at Abigail with such barely concealed disdain at every social function. Now she understood why. Hannah had been watching Abigail fall in love with her man, knowing it was all temporary, knowing she was just a placeholder until the real plan could unfold. How many people knew? How many of their friends, their wedding guests, were in on the joke? Was she the only one naive enough to believe in their fairy tale romance? Abigail looked around the mansion she'd lovingly transformed into their home. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every thoughtfully placed artwork, every detail she'd poured her heart into. It was all just set dressing for his elaborate con. The nursery she'd started planning upstairs was nothing more than a warehouse for his future product. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and played the message again, recording it this time. She needed proof. She needed to document this betrayal, not for revenge, but for her own sanity. Without evidence, she might convince herself she'd imagined it all, that love this intense couldn't possibly be fake. But it was fake. All of it. Standing slowly, Abigail walked through the mansion one last time, seeing it with new eyes. The bedroom where they'd made love so passionately. He'd been calculating her fertile days. The kitchen where they'd cooked together, laughing and stealing kisses. He'd been thinking about genetic compatibility and optimal nutrition for breeding. The living room where they'd danced to old jazz records. He'd been planning her eventual disposal. She climbed the stairs to their bedroom and opened the safe where she kept important documents. Her birth certificate, her passport, her mother's jewelry. Things that belonged to her, things from her real life before she'd become a character in Jace Walker's twisted play. She would leave in the morning, before he returned from Chicago. She would take nothing that he'd given her, nothing that carried the stain of his lies. She would disappear from his life as cleanly as possible, with her dignity intact and her heart shattered, but her spirit unbroken. Because Abigail Peter was many things: a talented designer, a loving daughter to parents who were gone too soon, a loyal friend, a passionate woman. But she was not, and would never be, anyone's broodmare. The Queen was about to show the King what happened when you tried to turn royalty into livestock. Chapter 4. The Queen's Escape. True nobility reveals itself not in accepting crowns, but in the grace with which one removes them. Abigail Peter had not slept. She sat in the darkness of what she'd believed was their sanctuary, watching dawn break over Connecticut countryside, planning her escape with military precision and the crystalline clarity that comes only from having every illusion obliterated. By 6 a.m. she'd made her first call. "Marcus," she said, when her closest friend answered, voice thick with sleep. "I need you here. Now. Don't ask questions. Just come." Marcus Fitzgerald had been her anchor since design school, her confidant through every heartbreak and triumph. They'd navigated her parents' death together, celebrated her first major commission together, and he'd been the one to talk her through her fears about trusting someone as powerful and wealthy as Jace Walker. One look at her face when he arrived, and he knew better than to probe for immediate details. "How much time do we have?" he asked simply, surveying the mansion that had become a mausoleum of broken dreams. "He lands at noon," Abigail replied, voice steady despite the devastation in her eyes. "I want every trace of my existence erased before then." What followed was the most efficient extraction in history. Abigail took only what had belonged to her before Jace: her clothes, her design materials, her mother's jewelry, her laptop with client files. Everything he'd given her remained behind. Designer gowns purchased for various galas, expensive jewelry he'd surprised her with, just because, commissioned art pieces for her studio, even custom furniture they'd selected together for their bedroom. She moved through the house like a spectre, erasing every trace of her presence with methodical precision. Throw pillows she'd chosen were removed and stored in closets. Warm lighting she'd installed was replaced with original harsh fixtures. Fresh flowers were discarded, candles packed away, personal photographs taken down and placed in a box for his discovery. "Abigail," Marcus said gently as she dismantled what had been her life. "What happened? You look like someone died." She handed him her phone and watched his expression transform as he listened to Jace's voice message. Color drained from his dark skin, his jaw clenched, and for a moment She thought he might put his fist through the nearest wall. "That soulless bastard," he whispered when the message ended. "That calculating, heartless piece of—" "Don't," Abigail interrupted quietly. "Don't waste your fury on him. He's worthless, less than worthless." "But you loved him," Marcus said, voice cracking for his friend. "You really, truly loved him with everything you had." "I loved an illusion," Abigail corrected, voice gaining strength with each word. "A character he created to manipulate me. The real Jace Walker is exactly what you heard in that message. Cold, calculating, capable of destroying someone's life for a business transaction." By 11 a.m., the mansion appeared exactly as it had when she'd first arrived. Cold, sterile, devoid of love or warmth or any evidence that a woman with dreams had attempted to make it home. Abigail took one final walk through the rooms, bidding farewell to the life she'd thought she was building. In the master bedroom, she opened the jewelry box and removed every piece Jace had given her. The engagement ring returned to its velvet case, placed carefully on his pillow where he couldn't possibly miss it. Diamond earrings, pearl necklaces, tennis bracelets he'd surprised her with after their first argument, all returned to their proper places. The only thing she kept was a simple gold locket her mother had given her, which she'd worn on their first date. Even that felt tainted now. But it was hers, from before him, and she wouldn't let him steal her mother's memory too. On the massive dining room table where they'd hosted their engagement party, where she'd dreamed of serving Christmas dinner to their children, Abigail left 3 items: the engagement ring in its pristine box, her house keys, and a single sheet of paper with 8 words written in her elegant script. "I am not a broodmare. I am a queen." No explanation, no accusation, no plea for him to call her or fight for her. Just a simple statement of fact that would communicate everything he needed to understand. As Marcus loaded her single suitcase into his car, Abigail took one last look at the Walker estate. Somewhere in this mansion was a master suite where she'd believed herself cherished, a studio where she'd designed their future, a kitchen where she'd imagined cooking for their children. All illusions, all lies. "You don't have to be strong right now," Marcus said as they drove away, the mansion disappearing in the rearview mirror. "Not with me. You can fall apart if you need to." "Yes, I do," Abigail replied, spine straight, chin high, "because if I break now, I might never put myself back together. And I refuse to let him destroy me." They drove in silence to Marcus's apartment in the city, where Abigail would stay until she determined her next move. She'd already made some decisions during her sleepless night. She was leaving New York, leaving the life she'd built here, starting over somewhere Jace Walker couldn't find her and corrupt with his money and influence. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since they left the estate, Jace's assistant wondering where she was, the wedding planner needing final decisions for a wedding that would never happen, friends wanting to confirm details for the rehearsal dinner she would not be attending. Abigail turned off the phone and removed the SIM card. That life was over. Those people, except for the precious few who truly mattered, belonged to the illusion she'd been living. At Marcus's apartment, she sat down with her laptop and began the methodical process of dismantling her existence as Jace Walker's fiancé. She cancelled wedding vendors, forfeited deposits she couldn't recover, sent brief explanations to the few people who deserved them. To her maid of honor, she wrote, "The wedding is cancelled. I discovered some things about Jace that made marriage impossible. I'm fine, just need space to process. Will call when I can." To her business partner, taking an indefinite leave of absence. "Handle active projects however you see fit. I trust your judgment completely." To the wedding planner, "The wedding is cancelled. Mr. Walker will explain and handle all financial obligations." She was thorough, professional, and utterly final in every communication. By evening, her phone was exploding with calls and texts from numbers she recognized. Jace, his assistant, his sister Emma, mutual friends who'd heard about the cancelled wedding. She deleted them all without reading them, without listening to the voicemails that poured in by the dozens. The only message she acknowledged was one that came through Marcus's phone at 6 p.m. It was from Jace, his voice panicked and desperate, so different from the cold calculation she'd heard in his message to Emma. "Abigail, please, I don't understand what's happening. I came home, and you're gone. Everything's gone. Your clothes, your things, even the warmth you brought to this house. There's just a ring and a note that doesn't make sense. Please call me. Please come home. We can fix whatever's wrong. I love you. I love you so much. It's killing me that you're not here." The message continued for 3 minutes, his voice breaking, pleading, sounding genuinely destroyed. If she hadn't heard his real voice, his true feelings about her, she might have believed this performance too. "He's exceptionally talented at this," she whispered to Marcus as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "He's really, truly gifted at deception." "But you're superior," Marcus replied firmly, wrapping his arms around his friend. "You're stronger than his lies, you're smarter than his games, and you're going to rebuild your life into something so magnificent that he'll spend the rest of his miserable existence regretting what he destroyed." That night, as Abigail lay in Marcus's guest room, she allowed herself to grieve. Not just for the relationship she'd lost, but for the woman she'd been. Trusting, optimistic, believing in love so completely that she'd ignored every warning sign. That woman was gone, and while Abigail mourned her, she also knew that the woman who would emerge from this betrayal would be wiser, stronger, unbreakable. She thought about Hannah Williams, probably celebrating tonight, probably in Jace's arms as he consoled himself over his missing breeding stock. Let them have each other. Let them build their empire on lies and manipulation. Abigail Peter was finished being anyone's pawn. By morning, she had made her decision. She was leaving New York, leaving the coast entirely. Somewhere in America was a place where she could rebuild, where she could remember who she was before Jace Walker, where she could become who she was meant to be. The engagement was terminated, the fairy tale was concluded, but the Queen's authentic story was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Mistress's Victory Dance. Victory tastes most bitter to those who have never earned it through honor. Hannah Williams stood in the doorway of Jace Walker's master bedroom, surveying the devastation with emotions far more complex than the triumph she'd anticipated. Clothes littered the floor where he'd hurled them in frustration. Empty whiskey bottles lined the nightstand like monuments to despair. The man she'd waited 5 years to call hers was disintegrating, and it wasn't remotely what she'd expected. "Jace, darling," she purred, entering the room with confidence born of finally having what she'd wanted. "You need nourishment. You haven't left this room in 3 days." Jace looked up from where he sat on the bed's edge, his usually immaculate hair disheveled, his cobalt eyes red-rimmed and feral. "She's gone, Hannah. Just vanished, like she never existed." "I know, sweetheart," Hannah said, settling beside him and threading manicured fingers through his hair. "But perhaps this is for the best." Perhaps she realized she wasn't equipped for this life, for the pressures and expectations that accompany being a walker. "She left the ring," Jace said, voice hollow as a tomb. 50 carats of perfect diamonds, and she abandoned it like costume jewelry. What kind of woman walks away from 50 carats and $50 million? The kind of woman who discovered your actual plan, Hannah thought, but didn't voice. She'd been wondering for days if Abigail had somehow uncovered their arrangement. The timing was too clean, too surgical. Women in love didn't just evaporate without explanation, especially not women planning dream weddings 3 weeks away. "She left a note," Jace continued, retrieving the crumpled paper from his pocket for the 100th time. "I am not a broodmare. I am a queen." What does that even mean? Hannah's blood turned arctic. Those words were too specific, too pointed. Abigail knew. Somehow, some way, she had discovered the truth about their 5-year conspiracy. "It means she's theatrical," Hannah said quickly, taking the note and crumpling it further. "Artists are like that. They overdramatize everything, create problems where none exist. She probably got cold feet about the wedding and is trying to make it sound noble." But even as she spoke, Hannah felt growing unease. She'd waited 5 years for this moment, 5 years of being Jace's secret, his hidden lover, his shameful little secret. 5 years of watching him parade other women in public while she remained in shadows, understanding that she was the woman he wanted but could never have if he wanted his grandfather's company. The Walker family legacy came with conditions, antiquated stipulations requiring the heir to marry appropriately, produce children, present the image of American dynastic success. Hannah Williams, with her working-class background and inability to bear children due to injuries from a college car accident, didn't fit their mold. But Abigail Peter, beautiful, accomplished, fertile Abigail, had been perfect for their purposes. It had been Hannah's idea, actually. She'd researched dozens of potential candidates, women who met the Walker board's expectations and could give Jace the heir he needed to maintain company control. Abigail had topped every list, successful in her own right, gorgeous, from respectable family, and romantic enough to fall completely for Jace's considerable charm. The plan had been flawless. Jace would marry Abigail, impregnate her quickly, and then, after a respectable period of playing devoted husband and father, divorce her quietly with generous settlement. Hannah would wait patiently, understanding, until she could finally step into the light as Mrs. Jace Walker. What Hannah hadn't anticipated was how thoroughly Jace would immerse himself in the devoted fiancé role. She'd watched him with Abigail at social events, observed the way he looked at her, touched her, spoke to her. If Hannah didn't know better, she'd think he'd actually fallen in love with his mark. "You're obsessing over someone who clearly didn't appreciate what you offered her," Hannah said now, wrapping her arms around Jace's shoulders. "I'm here. I've always been here. I'm the one who understands your world, your pressures, your needs. I'm the one who helped you solve the succession problem." Jace turned to look at her, and for a moment, Hannah saw something that made her heart race with hope. Need, desperation. The same look he used to give her before Abigail Peter entered their lives and complicated everything. "You're right," he said slowly. "You've been patient. You've been loyal. You've waited for me when any other woman would have moved on to someone who could offer her more." "I love you," Hannah whispered, the words she'd been holding back for months finally spilling out. "I've loved you through everything. Through her." Jace pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. Hannah closed her eyes and savored the moment. Finally, she had him back. But as days passed, Hannah began realizing that having Jace physically wasn't the same as having his heart. He went through the motions of their relationship, taking her to dinner, sleeping beside her, introducing her to business associates as his companion, but something fundamental was missing. He would stare out windows for hours, lost in thought. He hired 3 different private investigators to find Abigail, claiming he needed closure. He kept Abigail's engagement ring in his desk drawer, taking it out and staring at it when he thought Hannah wasn't looking. "You need to let her go," Hannah said one evening as they sat in his penthouse, overlooking the city where Abigail had once lived. "She made her choice. She chose to walk away from everything you offered her." "But why?" Jace asked, the same question he'd been asking for weeks. "We were perfect together. We were happy. I made her happy." "Were you?" Hannah asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Or were you just playing a part so convincingly that you convinced yourself it was real?" The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and loaded with implication. Jace turned to stare at her, his blue eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Hannah felt a moment of panic. She'd said too much, revealed too much of her knowledge about the situation. "I just mean that sometimes we can get caught up in an act, especially when the stakes are high. Your grandfather's will, the company's succession, the board's expectations. There was a lot of pressure to make that relationship work." "The company's succession," Jace repeated slowly. "Right, the heir requirement." He was looking at Hannah like he was seeing her for the first time, and not in a good way. She could practically see his mind working, connecting dots she'd hoped would stay scattered. "Hannah," he said carefully, "how much did you know about my plans with Abigail?" "What plans?" she asked, but her voice sounded false even to her own ears. "The timeline, the pregnancy schedule, the eventual divorce." His voice was getting harder, colder. "How much did you know?" Hannah felt the room temperature drop 10 degrees. This was not how this conversation was supposed to go. She was supposed to be comforting him, helping him move on, claiming her rightful place as his chosen partner. She wasn't supposed to be defending herself against accusations in his eyes. "Jace, I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," he cut her off. "I'm asking directly. Did you know that I was planning to use Abigail to secure my inheritance and then divorce her to marry you?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of secrets and manipulation. Hannah realized with growing horror that she was trapped. If she admitted to knowing, she looked like a conspirator. If she denied it, she looked like a liar. Either way, she was losing the man she'd sacrificed everything to get. "I knew you needed an heir," she said finally. "I knew our relationship couldn't be public until that was resolved. I understood the practical aspects of your situation." "Practical aspects," Jace repeated, his voice flat. "Is that what you call destroying an innocent woman's life?" Innocent. Hannah's carefully controlled composure finally cracked. "She was a fortune hunter like any other. She saw a billionaire and dollar signs and she played her part perfectly. The only difference is, she got cold feet at the last minute and decided to play the victim." The words hung in the air like poison, revealing everything Hannah had tried so hard to hide. Her jealousy, her resentment, her complete lack of empathy for the woman whose life they'd planned to destroy. Jace stood slowly, his face pale with realization. "You helped plan this. You researched her, didn't you? You found her for me." Hannah felt her world crumbling around her, 5 years of careful planning and patient waiting dissolving in a single moment of truth. "I found you the perfect solution to an impossible problem," she said desperately. "I saved your company, your legacy. I made it possible for us to be together. You helped me destroy the only woman I ever truly loved." Jace said, his voice broken. "Get out." "Jace, please, get out!" he roared, his control finally snapping completely. "Get out of my home, get out of my company, get out of my life!" As Hannah fled the penthouse, her victory turned to ash in her mouth. She realized she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that Jace's feelings for Abigail were part of the performance, that his heart belonged to her just as hers belonged to him. But she'd been wrong. Somewhere in the process of pretending to love Abigail Peter, Jace Walker had actually fallen in love with her. And now Hannah had lost not just the man she'd waited 5 years for, but also the only home she'd known in his company and his world. The mistress had won the battle but lost the war, and she was finally beginning to understand the true cost of her hollow victory. Chapter 6. The Billionaire's Breakdown. A throne without its queen is merely an empty chair. A king without his heart is simply a man drowning in his own crown. Jace Walker stood in his corner office atop Walker Technologies' gleaming tower, gazing at Manhattan's sprawling skyline without truly seeing any of it. 2 months had passed since Abigail vanished, and he had transformed into a man possessed by ghosts of his own making. "Mr. Walker?" His assistant Jennifer knocked tentatively on the door. The quarterly board meeting begins in 10 minutes. Cancel it, Jace said without turning from the window, his voice carrying the hollow timbre of exhaustion. Sir, you've cancelled the last 4 board meetings. Mr. Patterson is threatening to convene an emergency session to discuss your capacity to lead the organization. Capacity to lead. The irony tasted bitter as aged copper. He'd spent his entire adult life proving his worthiness to helm the Walker Empire, manipulating and scheming to secure his birthright. Now that he finally possessed everything he'd thought he desired, he couldn't summon the will to care about any of it. Tell Patterson he can go straight to hell, Jace said, finally pivoting from the window. Tell them all they can rot in their own greed. The company that was more important than love can survive without me for a few more days. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the dangerous edge in his tone. Sir, there's also been another call from Richmond Investigations. They have a progress report on the search for Miss Peter. That penetrated his fog immediately. He spun around, eyes blazing with hope and desperation that had become his constant companions. Put them through! Immediately. The call lasted 15 excruciating minutes, each word another nail in the coffin of Jace's sanity. Yes, they'd located her. No, she wouldn't see him. She'd made it crystal clear to everyone in her new life that she was not to be contacted by anyone from her past, especially not Jace Walker. She'd hired attorneys to send cease and desist letters, threatening harassment charges if he continued his attempts to reach her. Where is she? Jace demanded, his hand shaking as he gripped the phone. I cannot divulge that information, Mr. Walker. She's made it legally clear that any further contact would constitute stalking. My professional advice is to move forward with your life. After disconnecting, Jace swept everything off his desk in a fury, papers scattered like confetti, his computer monitor crashed to the marble floor, and his grandfather's photograph, the man whose approval had driven every decision Jace had ever made, shattered against the wall. He'd hired the best private investigators money could buy. He'd called in favors from contacts across the country. He'd even considered using Walker Technologies' considerable resources to track her down, though some remaining fragment of decency had prevented him from crossing that line. But every lead hit the same wall. Abigail Peter had disappeared as completely as if she'd never existed, and she'd built legal barriers around herself like a fortress, making it abundantly clear that Jace Walker was persona non grata in her new world. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent months calculating how to use her, manipulate her, ultimately discard her. Now she'd discarded him first, and he was the one left shattered, desperate, unable to function without the woman he'd planned to treat as disposable. His phone buzzed with yet another message from Hannah, begging him to reconsider, to let her explain, to give them another chance. He deleted it without reading it, just as he'd deleted the previous 150. Hannah Williams was a reminder of the worst part of himself, the calculating predator who'd thought he could engineer love like a corporate merger. The worst part was the dreams. Every night, Jace was tormented by memories that felt more real than his waking hours. Abigail laughing at something he'd said over dinner at their favorite restaurant in Little Italy. Abigail curled against his chest in their bed, tracing lazy patterns on his skin with her fingertips, while she told him about her day. Abigail in her wedding dress during the final fitting, spinning around in their bedroom and asking if he thought she looked like a princess. You look like a queen, he'd told her, and he'd meant it. When had the performance become real? When had the woman he'd chosen as a means to an end become the center of his entire universe? Mr. Walker? Jennifer's voice came through the intercom again. Your sister is here. Emma Walker Morrison swept into his office like a force of nature, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She took one look at the destruction around his desk, at her brother's hollow eyes and unkempt appearance, and shook her head in disgust. You look like hell, she said without preamble. Thanks for the pep talk, Jace replied, slumping into his chair. "What do you want, Emma?" "I want to know what's wrong with you," his sister said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You've been acting like a madman for months. The board is talking about removing you as CEO. The stock price has dropped 25% because investors are worried about your mental state. And frankly, so am I." Jace looked at his sister. Successful, brilliant, married to a man who adored her, and raising 3 children who thought she hung the moon. Everything he'd thought he wanted, everything he'd tried to engineer with Abigail. "Do you love Richard?" he asked suddenly. Emma blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Of course I love Richard." "What kind of question is that? But did you always love him? Or did it grow over time?" "Jace, what does this have to do with—" "Just answer the question." Emma studied her brother's face, seeing something there that made her choose her words carefully. "I was attracted to Richard first. Then I liked him. Then I respected him. Then I fell in love with him. It was a process, not a lightning bolt. Love that lasts requires foundation building." "Why?" "A process," Jace repeated. "Something that built over time, based on getting to know each other's authentic selves." "Yes. Why are you asking me this?" Jace was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I think I did everything backwards with Abigail." "What do you mean?" "I chose Abigail for all the wrong reasons," he said, the words tumbling out of him like a confession to a priest. "She was beautiful, successful, perfect genetic material for the Walker heir grandfather's will requires. I thought I could marry her, get her pregnant, and then move on with my life once I'd secured the company." Emma's face went pale as winter. "Jace, tell me you didn't—" "I planned the whole thing," he continued, unable to stop now that he'd started. "Hannah helped me research potential candidates. We chose Abigail because she was everything the board would approve of, everything grandfather would have wanted in a Walker wife. I was going to use her to secure my inheritance and then divorce her quietly." "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "You actually went through with it? That plan we talked about when you were drunk and angry about grandfather's ridiculous will, you actually did it?" "I did more than that," Jace said, his voice breaking. "I fell in love with her. Somewhere between the first kiss and the proposal, between the performance and the reality, I fell completely, utterly, irrevocably in love with her. And now she's gone, and I don't know how to live without her." Emma sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing her brother's confession. "Does she know about the plan?" Jace nodded miserably. "She must. She left a note that said, 'I am not a broodmare. I am a queen.' She figured it out somehow." "Good for her," Emma said firmly, surprising him. "Good for her." Jace stared at his sister in disbelief. "She's the love of my life. And you're saying good for her?" "Yes, I'm saying good for her." Emma stood up, her voice rising. "You tried to use her like a prize breeding animal, and she had the dignity to walk away. She deserves better than what you planned to give her." "But I love her," Jace said desperately. "I know it started wrong, but what I feel for her now is real. It's the most real thing I've ever experienced." "Then you need to prove it," Emma said. "Not with flowers or jewelry or grand gestures. You need to prove that you're worthy of a woman like that. You need to become the man she thought she was marrying, not the calculating bastard who tried to use her." "How?" Jace asked, his voice small and lost. "How do I prove something like that when she won't even let me find her?" Emma looked at her brother, really looked at him, and saw not the successful CEO or the master manipulator, but the scared little boy who'd always tried so hard to live up to their grandfather's impossible expectations. "You start by figuring out who you are when you're not trying to be what everyone else wants you to be," she said gently. You start by making choices based on what's right, not what's profitable. You start by becoming a man worthy of love, not just demanding it because you've decided you want it. After Emma left, Jace sat alone in his destroyed office, thinking about her words. He'd spent his entire life building an empire, accumulating wealth and power and influence. But what good was any of it without someone to share it with? What was the point of being a king if he'd driven away his queen? For the first time in his adult life, Jace Walker began to question everything he'd built his identity around. The company, the wealth, the legacy. None of it mattered if he couldn't be the kind of man worthy of Abigail's love. The breakdown was complete. Now, perhaps, the rebuilding could begin. Chapter 7. The grand gesture failure. Love lost through deception cannot be reclaimed through the same weapons that destroyed it. 8 months after Abigail's disappearance, Jace Walker finally found her. Monterey Bay, California, a coastal haven where she'd established a boutique design firm specializing in sustainable, affordable housing. She was living under her own name in a weathered cottage overlooking the Pacific, constructing a new existence from the ashes of their obliterated love story. Jace stood across the street from her office, watching through the window as she worked. She looked different, leaner, her natural hair in a magnificent afro instead of the sleek styles she'd worn in New York, dressed in flowing earth tones that made her skin luminous. She looked like herself in a way she never had when she was molding herself to fit his world. She also looked peaceful, content even. The realization struck him like lightning. She was thriving without him. The woman he observed through that window wasn't pining for what she'd lost. She was flourishing in what she'd discovered. But Jace Walker hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by accepting defeat gracefully. If he'd lost her through his mistakes, he would reclaim her through his determination. The flowers started arriving on Monday. Not the expensive hothouse orchids he used to send, but wildflowers from local farms, sunflowers and daisies and lavender that filled her office with natural beauty and intoxicating fragrance. Each arrangement came with a simple card. "I'm sorry, Jay." Abigail threw them away without reading the cards after the first day. Tuesday brought a visit from a real estate agent. "Miss Peter, I have wonderful news. Someone has purchased your building and wants to gift it to you free and clear. The deed is already being transferred to your name." Abigail's stomach plummeted. "Who purchased it?" The agent's smile faltered at her expression. "I'm not supposed to say, but given your reaction, I think you already know." "Tell Mr. Walker that I don't want his building," Abigail said firmly. "Tell him I don't want anything from him." By Wednesday, every business owner on her street had received anonymous donations large enough to renovate their storefronts completely. The local elementary school received new computers and comprehensive art supplies. The women's shelter where Abigail volunteered found their mortgage mysteriously paid off in full. Abigail watched the transformation of her adopted town with mounting fury. He was buying his way back into her life by bribing everyone around her. It was manipulative, presumptuous, and exactly the kind of power play that reminded her why she'd left him in the first place. Thursday morning, she found him waiting by her car as she left for work. "Hello, Abigail." She stopped short, her breath catching despite her resolve. He looked terrible, thinner than she'd ever seen him, his usually perfect hair unkempt, his expensive clothes hanging loose on his diminished frame. But his eyes were the same brilliant blue that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Go away, Jace," she said, moving toward her car. "Just give me 5 minutes." He said, not moving from his position beside her driver's door. 5 minutes to explain." "Explain what?" she asked, her voice sharp with barely controlled emotion. "Explain how you plan to use me as a broodmare. Explain how our entire relationship was a business transaction. Explain how you were going to divorce me the minute I gave you a son." Jace's face crumpled. "You heard the message." "Every word," Abigail confirmed. "Every calculated, heartless word." "That's not who I am anymore," Jace said desperately. "What I felt for you, what we had together, that was real. I know it started as something else, but it became real. You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything," Abigail replied. "And frankly, I don't care who you are now. I care about who you were when you were planning to destroy my life." She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. "I love you, Abigail. I know I have no right to say that. I know I hurt you in the worst possible way. But I love you more than I've ever loved anything or anyone." "You love the idea of me," she corrected. "You love having something you can't control. But you don't love me, Jace. You never did." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Abigail's voice rose, months of suppressed anger finally breaking free. "You don't even know who I really am. You fell in love with a version of me that I created to fit into your world. The real me eats cereal for dinner sometimes. The real me cries at dog food commercials. The real me wanted to name our first daughter Rose after my grandmother, but you probably don't even remember her name." "Rose," Jace said quietly. "Rose Margaret Peter. She raised you after your parents died, and she taught you that love should make you feel safe, not scared." Abigail's breath caught. He had been listening. He did remember. "She also taught you that a man who truly loves you will never make you question your worth," she said, her voice steadier now. "And that's exactly what you did. You made me question everything about myself, wonder if I was only valuable for what I could give you." "I was wrong," Jace said, stepping closer. "I was so focused on what I thought I needed that I almost destroyed the only thing I actually wanted. I've spent 8 months trying to figure out how to prove to you that what we had was real. By buying my building? By bribing my neighbors?" Abigail shook her head. "You still don't get it. You're still trying to control the situation with money and power." "Then tell me how," Jace pleaded. "Tell me what I need to do to prove that I love you." "You can't," Abigail said simply. "That's what you don't understand. You can't prove love after you've destroyed trust. You can't buy back a heart you've broken. And you can't undo the fact that you looked at me and saw a vessel for your legacy instead of a woman worthy of genuine love." She finally pushed past him to her car, but before getting in, she turned back one more time. "The Jace Walker I fell in love with never existed," she said, her voice soft but final. "He was a character you played to get what you wanted. And I won't spend the rest of my life wondering which version is real." As she drove away, leaving Jace standing alone on the sidewalk, she didn't look back. She'd built a new life here, one based on honesty and authenticity and work that mattered. She wouldn't let him buy his way back into it, no matter how convincing his performance. But as Jace watched her taillights disappear around the corner, something shifted inside him. She was right. Every gesture he'd made had been about his needs, his timeline, his desire to fix what he'd broken. He'd been trying to win her back the same way he'd won her in the first place, through calculation and manipulation, just with different goals. If he truly loved her, if he wanted to prove he was worthy of her love, he needed to stop trying to control the outcome. He needed to start over, not as Jace Walker the billionaire, but as simply Jace, a man who had lost everything that mattered and needed to figure out who he was without it. The grand gestures had failed. Now came the hard part, becoming someone worthy of a second chance, whether she ever gave him one or not. Chapter 8. The Ultimate Sacrifice. True love reveals itself not in what you're willing to do for someone, but in what you're willing to surrender. Jace Walker returned to New York City a broken man, but with clarity sharper than any he'd ever possessed. Abigail's words echoed through his mind during the entire cross-country flight. The Jace Walker I fell in love with never existed. She was absolutely right. The man she'd fallen for had been a carefully constructed persona designed to win her trust and secure his future. But somewhere in the process of performing love, he'd actually learned what it meant. Now he had to decide who he really was beneath all the wealth and power and ancestral expectations. The first thing he did was call an emergency board meeting. "Gentlemen," Jace said, standing at the head of the mahogany conference table where his grandfather's portrait still presided, watching over the empire he'd built. "I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately." The room erupted in chaos. Board members talked over each other, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, invoking clauses in his grandfather's will that would strip him of his inheritance. "Let me be crystal clear," Jace continued, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I'm not selling my shares, and I'm not abandoning the company permanently. But I need time to become the kind of man who deserves to lead this organization. Richard Morrison will serve as interim CEO." Emma's husband looked shocked, but nodded his acceptance. He'd been groomed for leadership for years. He could handle the transition seamlessly. "You're making a catastrophic mistake," Patterson, the board chairman, warned. "Your grandfather's will requires you to marry and produce an heir by your 40th birthday. You have less than 2 years remaining. Walk away now, and you might not get another opportunity." "My grandfather's will requires me to secure the Walker legacy," Jace corrected. "It says nothing about what kind of man I have to be when I do it, or whether I deserve the privilege of carrying on his name." After the meeting, Jace began the systematic dismantling of his life as he'd known it. He sold the Connecticut mansion, donating 60% of the proceeds to organizations supporting women and children, keeping only enough to ensure his basic needs were met. He liquidated most of his personal investments, creating trust funds for education and healthcare in underserved communities. But the most important decision came when Emma found him packing boxes in his Manhattan penthouse. "You're really doing this," she said, watching him wrap framed photographs in newspaper. "I'm really doing this," Jace confirmed. "I found her, Emma. I found Abigail. And she's better off without me. She's built a life that makes her genuinely happy, doing work that matters, living authentically in a way she never could when she was trying to fit into my world." He paused, holding a photo of them from their engagement party. They looked so happy, so in love. If only he'd known then what he knew now. "She told me the man she loved never really existed." "So you're giving up?" "No," Jace said, carefully placing the photo in a box. "I'm starting over. I'm going to become the man she thought she was marrying. Not to win her back. I may have lost that chance forever, but because it's the right thing to do." "Where will you go?" Jace smiled, the first genuine smile Emma had seen from him in months. "Monterey Bay. I'm going to learn an honest trade, contribute to the community, prove that I can create something with my hands instead of just moving money around on spreadsheets." He showed her a business card. "Morrison Construction. They're willing to take on an apprentice, even one with no experience. You do realize this is insane, right? You're giving up billions of dollars to become a carpenter?" "I'm not giving up billions of dollars," Jace corrected. "I'm investing them in becoming someone worthy of the love I threw away." The move to Monterey Bay was the hardest thing Jace had ever done. He rented a modest apartment above a Portuguese bakery, bought a pickup truck to replace his collection of luxury cars, and showed up at Morrison Construction at 6 a.m. sharp on his first Monday, ready to learn what honest work felt like. Frank Morrison, the owner, was a weathered man in his 60s who'd agreed to hire Jace primarily because of the substantial donation he'd made to the local trade school. "You'll start by cleaning up job sites," Frank told him on that first day. "Hauling debris, organizing tools, making coffee runs. Think you can handle that, Mr. Big Shot?" "Just Jace," he replied, "and yes, I can handle it." It was humbling work. His hands, soft from years of signing papers and shaking hands in boardrooms, were soon calloused and cut from handling lumber and tools. His back ached from physical labor in ways it never had from long days at a desk. But there was something deeply satisfying about seeing a pile of raw materials transform into something real and useful under his hands. The other workers were suspicious at first. Word had gotten around about who he really was, and they expected him to quit within a week when the novelty wore off. But Jace showed up every day, did whatever work was assigned to him without complaint, and slowly began to earn their grudging respect. "Why are you really here?" asked Miguel, a master carpenter who'd become something of a mentor to Jace. They were working on framing a house for a young family, and Jace was learning to measure and cut lumber with precision. "I hurt someone I love," Jace said simply. "I want to become the kind of man who wouldn't make that mistake." Miguel nodded as if that explanation made perfect sense. Love makes fools of us all. The lucky ones get a chance to learn from it. As weeks turned to months, Jace settled into a routine that was completely foreign to his old life. He woke at dawn, worked with his hands all day, came home exhausted but satisfied. He cooked simple meals, read books he'd never had time for, and volunteered at the community center where he taught basic business skills to local entrepreneurs. He also discovered that Abigail volunteered at the same center, teaching design workshops for kids. They maintained a careful distance, nodding politely when they passed in the hallways but never speaking. She seemed surprised by his presence but not threatened, as if she understood that this version of Jace was different from the man who'd tried to buy his way back into her life. The real test came when Hurricane Clara hit the coast 6 months after Jace arrived. The storm knocked out power for days and damaged dozens of homes, including several belonging to elderly residents who couldn't afford repairs. Without being asked, Jace organized a volunteer crew from Morrison Construction to work for free, rebuilding homes and businesses that had been damaged. He used his own money to buy materials, worked 16-hour days alongside his crew, and coordinated with local agencies to ensure no one was left without shelter. "You didn't have to do this," Frank told him, as they took a break from rebuilding Mrs. Chen's back porch. "These people aren't your responsibility." "Yes, they are," Jace replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "When you choose to be part of a community, everyone becomes your responsibility." It was during the hurricane recovery that Jace first spoke to Abigail in almost a year. He was carrying supplies into the community center when he found her in the kitchen, making sandwiches for the volunteer workers. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, their eyes met across the room. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you're doing. The whole town is talking about how you've helped." "It's what anyone would do," Jace replied, setting down the boxes of supplies. "No," Abigail said, shaking her head. "It's what a good man would do." "The question is, are you doing it because you're a good man, or because you want people to think you're a good man?" It was a fair question, one Jace had asked himself many times over the past months. 6 months ago, I would have done it because I wanted you to see me differently, he admitted. Today, I'm doing it because Mrs. Chen reminds me of my grandmother, and Miguel has 3 kids who need a safe place to sleep. Abigail studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or manipulation. Instead, she saw something she'd never seen before, genuine humility. "You look different," she said finally. Jace glanced down at his work clothes, his calloused hands, his sun-weathered skin. "I feel different. I feel real." "Good," Abigail said, returning to her sandwich making. "The world has enough fake people." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was acknowledgement that the man standing before her was not the same one who had tried to use her as a means to an end. As Jace walked back to his job site, carrying that small moment of not quite forgiveness like a treasure, he realized that winning Abigail back was no longer his primary goal. His primary goal was becoming worthy of any woman's love, hers or someone else's. The ultimate sacrifice wasn't his money or his mansion or even his company. The ultimate sacrifice was his old self, the calculating businessman who saw people as assets to be acquired and managed. That man was gone forever. The question now was whether the man he was becoming would be enough to earn a second chance at love. Chapter 9. Walls Coming Down. Forgiveness is not a destination. It is a bridge constructed one honest conversation at a time. The first time Abigail Peter spoke to Jace Walker, really spoke to him, not just polite exchanges in passing, was on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 1 year after she'd fled New York with nothing but a broken heart and unshakable determination to rebuild her life. She found him sitting on the bench outside the community center at 6 a.m., looking exhausted and holding an ice pack to his left hand. "Are you hurt?" she asked, surprising herself by stopping instead of walking past. Jace looked up, clearly startled to see her. Over the past year, they'd developed an unspoken understanding, polite acknowledgement, careful distance, mutual respect for the invisible boundaries between them. "Table saw disagreed with my measuring," he said, holding up his bandaged hand. "Frank sent me home early, said I was too tired to be safe around power tools." "You've been working double shifts again," Abigail observed. It wasn't a question. The whole town knew that Jace had been practically living at job sites since the Henderson family lost their home in a fire 3 weeks earlier. "They need a place to live," Jace said simply. "Their insurance won't cover temporary housing, and the kids need stability while they're dealing with the trauma of losing everything they owned." "So you're rebuilding their house for free and paying for their hotel room?" Abigail said. Again, not a question. Word traveled fast in a small town, and Jace's quiet generosity had become legendary among the locals. Jace shrugged. "I have the money. They have the need. It's not complicated." "It's also not your responsibility," Abigail pointed out, echoing what she'd heard others say around town. Some people were suspicious of Jace's generosity, wondering what his angle was, what he expected in return. "Whose responsibility is it then?" Jace asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "The government that won't expand affordable housing programs? The insurance company that's looking for any excuse to deny claims? The community that's already struggling to take care of its own?" Abigail sat down on the other end of the bench, maintaining distance but accepting the conversation. "You sound like you've given this a lot of thought." "I've had a lot of time to think over the past year," Jace said, "about responsibility, about community, about what it means to actually contribute to the world instead of just extracting profit from it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the town wake up around them. Abigail found herself studying Jace's profile, noting the changes a year of physical labor had made. His face was leaner, weathered by sun and wind. His hands were scarred and calloused. His posture was different too, less rigid, more relaxed, like he'd finally learned to inhabit his own body. "Why did you really come here?" she asked suddenly. Jace was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and honest. "Because you were here. Because I thought if I could prove I'd changed, if I could become the man you thought you were marrying, maybe you'd give me another chance. And now? Now, I think I came here for me, to figure out who I actually am when I'm not trying to live up to someone else's expectations or manipulate someone into loving me." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes clear and direct. "I'm not the same person who hurt you, Abigail, but I'm also not trying to win you back anymore." "Why not?" The question surprised her even as she asked it. "Because I finally understand what you meant when you said the man you fell in love with never existed," Jace replied. "That man was a performance, carefully crafted to get what I wanted. The man I am now, He might not be someone you could love, but at least he's real. Abigail felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. Tell me about him, this real man. He gets up at dawn because he's learned to love watching the sun rise over the ocean. He drinks his coffee black because adding cream seems like unnecessary complication. He's terrible at small talk, but great at listening when people really need to be heard. Jace paused, a small smile playing at his lips. He cries at dog food commercials too, it turns out. Despite herself, Abigail smiled. Really? Really? There was this ad with an old dog and a little girl and I just lost it. Completely embarrassing. He shook his head. Miguel hasn't let me live it down. Miguel seems like a good friend, Abigail observed. He is. First real friend I've ever had, actually. Turns out it's easier to make genuine connections when you're not constantly calculating how people can be useful to you. They talked for another hour as the town came alive around them. Jace told her about his work, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, about the community of workers who'd accepted him despite his past. Abigail found herself sharing stories about her design projects, about the families she was helping create affordable, beautiful homes, about the peace she'd found in this small coastal town. I should go, Abigail said finally, standing as the community center started to fill with the morning volunteer crew. I have a client meeting. Abigail, Jace said as she turned to leave. Would you maybe like to have coffee sometime? Just coffee as friends. I'd like to hear more about your work. She studied his face, searching for hidden motives, for the manipulation she'd learned to expect from him. Instead, she saw only genuine interest and carefully guarded hope. Just coffee? She asked. Just coffee, he confirmed. No agenda, no expectations. Just two people who used to know each other, trying to figure out if they can be friends. Saturday morning, Abigail said after a long pause. The cafe on Main Street. 8 o'clock. I'll be there, Jace said, and his smile was so genuinely happy that Abigail felt her heart skip a beat. Saturday morning found them at a corner table in the small cafe, sharing pastries and talking about everything except their past. Jace asked thoughtful questions about her design philosophy, her dreams for expanding affordable housing options. Abigail found herself curious about his transition from corporate executive to carpenter, about what he'd learned from physical labor. It's humbling, Jace admitted, holding up his scarred hands. When you're used to solving problems with money and influence, learning to solve them with patience and skill is different. Better, I think. You think? I know, he corrected. When I write a check to fix a problem, I feel useful. When I actually fix something with my own hands, I feel worthy. Does that make sense? It did make sense, more than Abigail wanted to admit. She'd felt something similar when she'd left New York, when she'd stopped trying to design spaces that impressed rich clients and started creating homes that actually served families' needs. Their coffee meetings became a weekly ritual. Saturday mornings at the cafe, then walks along the beach, conversations that ranged from the philosophical to the mundane. Abigail found herself looking forward to these meetings, anticipating Jace's insights about books he was reading, his stories about his co-workers, his questions about her life and work. More importantly, she found herself trusting him again. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough to share pieces of herself she'd kept hidden since leaving New York. Her fears about starting over, her struggles with trusting her own judgment, her growing love for the community she'd found here. I was so angry when I first got here, she admitted one Saturday as they walked along the shoreline. Angry at you, angry at myself for being so naive, angry at the world for not being what I thought it was. And now? Jace asked, walking carefully beside her, respecting the space between them. Now I'm grateful, Abigail said, surprising herself with the truth of it. If our relationship hadn't ended the way it did, I never would have found this place, this life, this version of myself. I like who I am here." "You're extraordinary here," Jace said quietly. "You were extraordinary in New York too, but there you were trying to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be. Here, you're just... you... Is that who you fell in love with?" Abigail asked, the question hanging between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. "The real me?" Jace stopped walking, turning to face her. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I thought I loved you in New York, but I'm not sure I was capable of real love then. I was too focused on what you could give me to see who you actually were. And now? Now I see you," Jace said simply. "And I think I'm finally becoming someone who might be worthy of being seen by you." It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was just truth, offered without expectation, without agenda. And somehow, that made it more powerful than any grand gesture he could have made. As they walked back toward town, their hands almost touching as they moved, Abigail felt the walls around her heart beginning to crumble. Not all at once, not without fear, but slowly, carefully, like a building being deconstructed with the hope that something better could be built in its place. The bridge between them was being constructed, one honest conversation at a time. Chapter 10. The Queen's Crown Restored. Love that survives betrayal and returns transformed is not love renewed. It is love reborn in fire and forged in truth. 2 years after Abigail Peter had fled New York City with a heart splintered beyond recognition, she stood in the workshop behind her cottage, adding final touches to a custom engagement ring unlike any she'd ever created. The band was carved from driftwood, a piece she'd discovered on the beach where she and Jace had taken their first tentative walk as friends rebuilding trust. She'd spent weeks carving it, sanding until silk smooth, treating with oils until it glowed like captured honey. Set into the wood was not a diamond, but sea glass, pale green and perfect, polished by decades of ocean waves. It was a ring for a proposal that might never come, crafted by hands that had learned to hope again despite their hard-earned caution. "That's absolutely beautiful," said a voice from the doorway. Abigail looked up to find Jace standing there, and her heart performed the same little dance it had been doing for months whenever she encountered him unexpectedly. 2 years of friendship, of slowly rebuilding trust, of learning to love the man he'd become rather than mourning the man she'd thought he was. "Thank you," she said, setting down her tools with deliberate calm. "It's for the Hendersons' daughter. She's getting engaged next month." Jace stepped into the workshop, admiring the pieces scattered around, custom furniture, jewelry, decorative items that had made Abigail's design business one of the most sought after on the coast. "Everything you create is beautiful. You have a gift for taking broken things and transforming them into something better than they were before." "I had an excellent teacher," Abigail said, meeting his eyes. "Heartbreak is an extraordinary instructor in the art of reconstruction." They'd been dancing around each other for months now, their friendship deepening into something that felt like love, but remained unspoken. Coffee dates had evolved into dinner dates, which had become long evening walks, which had become quiet nights reading together on her porch, while ocean waves provided nature's soundtrack. But neither had been brave enough to name what was growing between them. "Abigail," Jace said, his voice suddenly serious, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, noting the nervous energy in his posture, the way he was fidgeting with something in his pocket. "What is it?" "I'm leaving Monterey Bay." The words struck her like physical blows. After 2 years of carefully rebuilding their connection, after learning to trust him again, after allowing herself to hope, he was leaving. "Oh," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "When?" "Next month. I have to return to New York, at least temporarily. The board wants me to resume my position as CEO, and there are legal issues with my grandfather's will that need resolution before my 40th birthday." Abigail nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Of course he was leaving. He'd never intended to stay forever. This life, this town, their friendship, it had all been temporary for him, a way station on his journey back to his real life. "But before I go," Jace continued, pulling something from his pocket, "I have something I need to ask you." He knelt down right there in her workshop, among the wood shavings and half-finished projects, holding something in his hands that made Abigail's breath catch in her throat. It was a ring, not the massive diamond he'd proposed with before, but something simple and perfect. A thin band of silver that looked hand-forged, set with a small stone that caught the light like captured starfire. "This isn't the same proposal I made 2 years ago," Jace said, his voice steady, despite the emotion blazing in his eyes. "That was about what I needed from you. This is about what I want to give you." "Jace, let me finish," he said gently. "I love you, Abigail. Not the version of you that I tried to mold to fit my life, but the woman you actually are. I love your strength, your creativity, your ability to see beauty in broken things. I love that you eat cereal for dinner and cry at dog food commercials and believe that everyone deserves a beautiful home." Tears were streaming down Abigail's face now, but she didn't interrupt. "I love that you took the worst thing that ever happened to you and used it to build a life that matters," Jace continued. "I love that you taught me what it means to be part of a community, to contribute instead of just consume. I love that you gave me the chance to become someone worthy of your friendship, even when I didn't deserve it." He held up the ring, and Abigail could see that it was engraved with tiny words around the band. "For my queen, with my whole heart." "I'm not asking you to come back to New York with me," Jace said. "I'm not asking you to give up the life you've built here. I'm asking if you'll let me stay in Monterey Bay and build a life with you. I'm asking if you'll marry me, not because I need you to secure my future, but because I can't imagine my future without you in it." Abigail stared at him, this man who had broken her heart so completely that she'd had to rebuild herself from scratch. This man who had then spent 2 years proving that he was worthy of her trust again. This man who was offering to give up his empire to share her simple life by the sea. "What about Walker Technologies?" she asked. "What about your grandfather's will?" "I'm transferring my controlling shares to Emma and Richard," Jace said. "They'll run the company better than I ever did. As for my grandfather's will, well, it requires me to marry and have children to maintain the family legacy. I'd rather create my own legacy, with you, if you'll have me. And if I say no, then I respect your decision and treasure the friendship you've given me," Jace said without hesitation. "Your happiness matters more to me than my own wants. If you're happier without me, then that's what I want for you." Abigail looked down at this man who had once tried to use her as a means to an end, who had learned to love her for who she really was, who was now offering to sacrifice everything he'd once valued to build something real with her. "Ask me," she whispered. "What?" "Ask me properly," she said, smiling through her tears. Jace's face lit up with hope and joy. "Abigail Peter, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my queen for the rest of our lives? Will you help me build a love story worthy of the extraordinary woman you are?" "Yes," Abigail said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes, I'll be your queen, as long as you remember that queens rule beside their kings, not beneath them." Jace slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was different from any they'd shared before, not desperate with passion like their first time, not poisoned by lies like their last time in New York, but warm with genuine love and bright with hope for their future. "I have one condition," Abigail said when they broke apart. Anything, Jace replied. We're having a long engagement. At least a year. I want to be absolutely sure that the man I'm marrying is the man I'll be married to, not another performance that will disappear after the honeymoon. 2 years if you want, Jace said, spinning her around the workshop. 5 years, forever. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not changing back into who I used to be. That man is gone, Abigail. He died the day you walked out of my life and taught me what it felt like to lose something that actually mattered. As he set her down, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, Abigail looked at the ring on her finger. It was nothing like the massive diamond he'd given her before. It was better. It was real, handmade with love instead of bought to impress. It represented not what he could afford to give her, but what he chose to offer her, his whole heart, freely given. Their second engagement was nothing like their first. No magazine spreads, no society events, no elaborate planning. They celebrated with a barbecue in Abigail's backyard, surrounded by the community that had embraced them both. Frank Morrison toasted them with beer in mason jars. Miguel's wife made tres leches cake. The Henderson children played in the garden while their parents thanked Jace again for rebuilding their home. This is what I always wanted, Abigail whispered to Jace as they danced barefoot on the grass to music from an old radio. What? A backyard party? A family, she said. Not just you and me, but this whole community. People who love us for who we are, not what we can do for them. Speaking of family, Jace said, pulling back to look at her, I should probably mention that Emma is flying out next week. She wants to meet the woman who taught her brother how to be human. And I should probably mention that I want children, Abigail said. Real children, wanted and loved and cherished, not heirs to secure an inheritance. How many children? Jace asked, echoing a conversation they'd had in another life, in another version of their love story. As many as we're blessed with, Abigail replied. Boys, girls, adopted, biological, I don't care. I just want to fill this house with love and laughter and the kind of chaos that comes from a family that actually chooses each other every day. That sounds perfect, Jace said, spinning her again under the string lights they'd hung in the trees. Absolutely perfect. The following week brought an unexpected visitor. Hannah Williams arrived in Monterey Bay without warning, appearing at Abigail's door on a Tuesday evening, looking nervous and contrite. I know you have no reason to see me, Hannah said when Abigail answered the door, but I need to say something. Against her better judgment, Abigail invited her in. Hannah looked different, softer somehow, less sharp around the edges. She was wearing a simple wedding ring that Abigail hadn't seen before. I got married 6 months ago, Hannah said, following Abigail's gaze, to a man who loves me for who I am, not what I can give him. It made me realize how wrong I was about everything. What do you want, Hannah? I want to apologize, not just for my part in what Jace did to you, but for how I thought about you, about love, about what people deserve. Hannah's voice was quiet, sincere. I convinced myself that you were just a gold digger, that you didn't really love him. It made it easier to justify what we were planning. And now? Now I know that you were the only real thing in his life, Hannah said. Watching him fall apart after you left, seeing him give up everything to try to become worthy of you again, I realized that what you two had was what I'd been looking for my whole life. They talked for an hour. Two women who had been on opposite sides of a terrible plan, finding unexpected understanding in each other's stories. When Hannah left, she hugged Abigail goodbye. Take care of him, she said. He's finally become the man you thought you were marrying. 2 years later, on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Abigail Peter married Jace Walker in a ceremony that was everything their first planned wedding hadn't been. Simple, authentic, focused on the promises they were making rather than the spectacle they were creating. Emma served as matron of honor, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother marry a woman who had saved his soul. Marcus walked Abigail down the aisle, whispering that her grandmother Rose would be proud of the queen she'd become. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises that were raw and honest and real. "I promise to love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are," Jace said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "I promise to choose you every day, not because I need you, but because I want to build a life alongside the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. I promise to be worthy of the gift of your love and to never take it for granted again." "I promise to trust you with my heart again," Abigail replied. "Not because you've earned it through grand gestures, but because you've proven yourself worthy through 1,000 small acts of love. I promise to be your queen, your partner, your equal in all things. I promise to build with you a love that's stronger for having survived its breaking." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, when they kissed as the sun set over the ocean, they both loved. When their friends and family cheered and threw flower petals that caught the evening breeze, Abigail felt something she'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. At the reception that followed, held in the community center where they'd first begun to rebuild their friendship, Jace stood before their guests with a microphone in his hand. "2 years ago," he said, his voice strong and clear, "I made the worst mistake of my life. I let pride and greed and family expectations convince me to treat the woman I loved like a business transaction. When she discovered the truth, she left me, and I deserved every moment of the pain that followed." The room fell silent. Abigail looked at him with surprise. They hadn't discussed this. "Today I want to say publicly what I should have said then," Jace continued, his eyes finding Abigail's across the room. "Hannah Williams was never my choice. She was a business arrangement, a partnership I mistook for love. Abigail Peter was and is the only woman I have ever truly loved. She left me because I tried to use her, and she came back because I learned to love her the way she deserved to be loved from the beginning." He set down the microphone and walked to Abigail, taking her hands in his. "In front of everyone who matters to us, I want to say this. I love only you. I have loved only you since the moment I first saw you, even when I was too broken to love you properly. You are my queen, my heart, my everything." The room erupted in applause, but Abigail only had eyes for her husband, this man who had finally given her the public declaration she'd never known she needed. That night, in the house Jace had built for them with his own hands, as they lay entwined in the darkness, listening to the waves crash against the shore, Abigail traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "Do you ever think about the woman you would have become if I hadn't hurt you?" Jace asked quietly. "No," Abigail said without hesitation, "because that woman never would have been strong enough to deserve you. The real you, I mean. She would have been satisfied with the performance, would have lived her whole life loving a lie. The woman I am now, she knows the difference between love and manipulation, between grand gestures and genuine devotion." "I'm sorry it took losing you to teach me how to love you," Jace said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm not," Abigail replied, surprising them both, "because the love we have now is real. It's been tested by betrayal and survived. It's been built on truth instead of lies. It's the kind of love that lasts forever, because it's not based on what we can get from each other, but on who we choose to be together." 5 years later, as Abigail watched Jace teach their son to build a treehouse in their backyard, while their daughter played in the garden they'd planted together, she thought about the fairy tale she'd once believed she was living. That story had been beautiful but fragile, built on illusions that crumbled at the first touch of reality. This story, messy and complicated and real, was better. It was a love story that had survived everything life could throw at it and emerged stronger. It was the kind of love that Grandmother Rose had always said was worth waiting for, love that made you feel safe and brave and worthy all at once. The Queen had reclaimed her crown, but more importantly, she'd found her king. And together, they were building an empire, not of wealth and power, but of love and family and community. It was, Abigail thought, as Jace caught her eye across the yard and smiled the smile he reserved just for her, the greatest love story ever told. Not because it was perfect from the beginning, but because it had been broken and rebuilt with truth. Not because it was easy, but because they had both chosen to become worthy of it. Not because they never faced challenges, but because they had learned to face them together. Their love story wasn't about a billionaire and his perfect fiancé. It wasn't about grand gestures and fairy tale moments. It was about two people who had lost each other and found themselves in the process. It was about a woman who had learned she was a queen and a man who had discovered what it truly meant to be worthy of royalty. As their children's laughter filled the air and the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before them, Abigail Peter Walker knew with absolute certainty that she was living the greatest love story ever told, not because it was written for her, but because she had helped write it herself. And it was indeed the most beautiful ending she could have ever imagined.